Wabash Women's Clubhouse, made on March 21st, 1981. Mrs. E.K. Jones conducting the tour. Tape made by the Wabash Junior High History Club.
Now, this room is a lounge, and ladies have parties in here. And sometimes this is set up for parties, and sometimes they have club meetings and everything else in this room. And there are some beautiful old pictures in this room. The one out there is a very old one, and it's a copy of an older one. But Wabash probably looked very much like that when it was founded. And there was a hotel, as I said a while ago, there was a hotel up in the Grove that faintly resembled that hotel. And this is a painting probably of Logansport, in the days when Logansport was a very, very busy place because the Erie Canal and the Wabash River. And that painting over there comes to us from, we have a lot of paintings from that same family. There's a lovely house down here, a big brick house down here. The Dr. and Mrs. George lived there, and Dr. Hahn lived there. And that house was built about 100 years ago, and some of these paintings came from the family that lived there. And when they gave up a big house up in North Madison to stay in this, they gave these paintings to the woman's gift. There was a lady here in town whose husband was the minister of the Christian church. Does anybody here go to the Christian church? And you may have heard the name Dr. James. He was a minister there for a long time. And his wife painted. She was an artist, and that was one of the paintings that she did for the women's club, and she gave it to me. And Mrs. Wood, who has the wood craft shop downtown, gave that painting. She did that. And you know what we do? Sometimes we get paintings from the Wabash Carnegie Library. You ever borrow paintings from down there? Well, you know they lend paintings just near the damn books. Every once in a while we see paintings down there. And I want to tell you about that lovely floral arrangement was given by one of the clubmen in the last fall. We celebrated our 50th anniversary. And you'd be surprised how that bouquet has traveled. I've seen it in their parties, I've seen it in the other dining room parties, I've seen it upstairs, I've seen it downstairs, and people have enjoyed it. It wasn't a lovely gift to send it to you. Well, why don't we go on? Does anybody have a question about anything in this room? Yes. Well, that's a cheesecake, or it may be one of the very things. I don't know what the subject matter is, but I do think it's a handsome painting. And you know, it's framed, the way paintings were framed, fine paintings so often were framed in that fashion. Ordinarily, an oil painting does not have a frame over the surface. But you see, this has a beautiful gold-free frame, and the whole thing was put into a shadow box to protect the painting. And that was one of the gifts from the Dory family. Isn't that interesting? I don't know what. I go to a place up in Lake Michigan, and I think it looks like that coastline. Now, if you go to some other lake, you may think it looks like that. And if you're on the seashore someplace, you may think it looks like that. But it's so wonderful to paint in the water. Doesn't it make you feel just like there is water? And I would not like to scramble up those rocks. Anybody else have a question?
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
do you know much about, like this room in its original use?
Yes, I do.
Hospital.
And I thought when you go upstairs, you'll talk about how many more principals up there. You get all seated, and you'll talk about the history of the building. And I thought so long as we were here, we'd just talk about this room. Anybody have questions about this room? Well, then let's go upstairs, Bruce. Up this way. All right. Go up here. And may I call your attention to those handsome things on the bulletin board that were done by the Junior Historical Society. I hope you don't freeze up here. It's chilly. Oh, that's all right. Now, you know what a cultural lag is? Well, every once in a while, somebody names something or does something, and the thing sticks, and the term prevails. I know of a church in Sweden where people always turn one way and bow, and they've done it for hundreds of years. And finally, somebody came to visit in that village and said, "Why do people turn and bow at that?" Well, nobody knew why. Nobody knew why. But at one time, the altar had been on that wall hundreds of years ago. So in respect to the altar, they bowed. But they kept it up even long after the altar was out. Well, we call this the ballroom. Now, there hasn't been a ball up here in a long, long time. But somehow we think ballroom sounds so much more elegant than auditorium. And I don't know, I think it's so interesting because nobody ever speaks of this as any kind of meeting room. It's always the ballroom. And we haven't had a dance up here in years and years. And I suppose the laws today, the kind of dancing that's done, it wouldn't even be safe to have a dance up here. But this is a room that is used very, very a great deal. And it's used for all kinds of lectures and programs. And we have musical programs up here. And you'll notice we have a beautiful piano, which was given by Mr. and Mrs. Honeywell. People in Wabash have always been interested in women's club. Well, I tell you how the Women's Club came about. The story begins even so much farther back in time than Wabash itself. There wasn't very much built around here. You know about Chief Little Charlie. Chief Little Charlie was one of the Miami Indians who was loyal to the United States government. And Chief Little Charlie was a Miami. Now, he could have been a bad influence, but he wasn't. And he tried to have his people obey the laws. And first, you know where Charlie Creek got its name? Where did it get its name?
From Chief Little Charlie.
That's right, of course it did. And Chief Little Charlie was given more than a section of land. He was given about a square mile. Some say it was a little more than that. And that was about 640 acres. Maybe it was a little larger grant than that. And Chief Charlie's land, you know where Carroll Street is? You know where Fisher Street is? Well, it's the next street west. Well, there was a line that went about midway between those two streets, all the way down to the river. And then this whole section from the river to the north end of the town belonged to Chief Charlie. And you know the abstracts in your houses, if you live in the northwest part of town, your abstracts may go back to say that this land was Chief Charlie's land. I think you'd find that very interesting. Well, it was Chief Charlie's land. This was given to him about the time, probably a year after Wabash was incorporated in the city, along about 1835, 36, this land was given. Isn't that right? And then Wabash started to grow, and Wabash became a very, very important agricultural center because the land was fertile and they could raise so many different crops. And of course, when the railroads came in, first of all, when the canal was important, they shipped the produce by canal, and then they shipped the produce by railroad. And Wabash County became very proud of its agricultural achievements. So there was an agricultural society founded. So the Agricultural Society decided they should have a Wabash County fairground. And did you know what the city park was once the fairground? And you know that oval that's out there in the park that goes around? You have any idea what that was? That was a racetrack. People had fine horses, and they'd have races. They'd have regular horse races, and I guess occasionally they had some fine driving horses, and they had sulky races out there. But that round place out there. You've probably ridden your bicycles around that oval. But that was the oval where they had a racetrack. Now they had a fair out there. They purchased the land in 1856. The Agricultural Society bought that for Chief Charlie's. I don't know what did Chief Charlie die? Well, I haven't either. It occurred to me today I didn't have any right to get up here and say where, but at any rate, the land had been Chief Charlie's, and it was purchased about 30 years after the government had given it to Chief Charlie. So it was purchased by the Agricultural Society, and for a long time they had all kinds of exhibits. They'd bring in all their prize crops and their prize fruits, and you know, the ladies would bring in quilts they'd made and all that sort of thing. And they had fine sewing exhibitions. We had a big quilt show down here last week. And I don't know. There was one quilt. It probably, I doubt if it might have been shown. We had a great many that went back to 1815, 1816. I don't know that any of them were exhibited. But there was one quilt that was made in 1813. Just like that. And it's still holding together. Well, that flourished for about 30 years. There was a big fair there every fall. And then the fairground was given by the Agricultural Society to Wabash. About 10 acres of it was given to Wabash for a park for the enjoyment of the citizens of Wabash and Wabash County. And that took place about 1886. Now this part, the land where this stands, was not purchased until later. You know, isn't it wonderful those good things people do in communities? Now, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was a very important organization. It still flourishes. And the ladies became very much upset about the fact there was no place for orphans. And there were 9 orphans who were housed out in the county farm. And that was no place for young people to be brought up. And somehow, I don't know what legislation went on, but they prevailed upon the county commissioners to let them build an orphanage. Now just think, 9 women started this. And they did everything under the sun. Now women didn't go out and work the way women do today. But those ladies had suppers, they sold things, they did everything under the sun to raise enough money to build the original structure here. And in 1889, I think 1888 they contracted, but by about 1889, this part of the building, and I'm not sure just which part, I think probably it went clear over to that side of the building, was built. And they had 9 children they brought in here. They hired a woman to look after the older children. They hired a woman to look after the younger children. They hired a cook. And they bought food, and people were so good to give them things to take care of those children. And more than 200 children were given homes in this building. Now, not all at the same time. And there weren't the social agencies that we have today that look after children and arrange for adoptions and that kind of thing. But these ladies, when people wanted to adopt the children, they did the best they could with providing homes for them. And there were never more than 30 children here at a time. But this was home to them. And the ladies even built a back porch out there, so there would be some place for children to play in bad weather. Then it remained the children's home until about 1905. And, you know, I should have told you, though, before the orphanage came over here, there was a building over, you know, on the south side where the fire station stands. There was a building there that had an interesting history. It was a water cure kind of spa at one time, and then it was an academy, and then it was a seminary for young ladies, and then finally there were 2 orphanages over there. But this remained the orphanage until about 1905, and then a hospital was moved in here. Now there wasn't a hospital, and I tell you they had an awful time. because there weren't hospitals in many communities. And the doctors in the community were so much interested in having some place where people could be taken care of. And you know, I read some old accounts. The doctors would manage to buy ice, keep things cool down here. Not everybody had refrigerators. That doesn't seem possible, does it? And people had to have, they cut ice in ponds and brought it in, you know, and that's the way food was kept. And the doctors even chipped in and bought a cow so they could have fresh milk down here for patients. And then it was a training school. About 1912, Miss Rose Thomas started a hospital training school. There weren't schools for nurses. Can you imagine that? And this became a training school for nurses. And do you know how many people there were in the first graduating class? There were three. 3 young ladies completed the course. And they had their graduation exercises down at the Presbyterian Church. So this remained a private hospital up until about 1919. And then it was purchased by the county. And then about 1921, the new hospital, which is now being made larger. Now just think, Wabash didn't have a single hospital. And this became the hospital. They did build that extension into it. And in your lifetimes, that hospital out here has been, I think in their lifetimes, that hospital's been increased twice in size. Just think of that. And it's going to be made even bigger now. Well, after the hospital moved out on East Street, this place was vacant. And it stood vacant. But, probably 6, 7 years. And then women in town thought, well, they ought to have a women's club. So about 1927, they began to work to have a women's club. And by 1930, the city did let them use this building as a women's club. And they had to remodel it. And, oh, dear, there wasn't any money for them to do things. You know, it all takes money to do things. They had rummage sales. They had bake sales. They just had everything under the sun. And then, in June of 1930, the Women's Club was incorporated, and they worked like mad on this building. They had to do some remodeling, and they didn't have carpeting. And back in that time, if people saved wool and saved old wool rugs and old wool coats and everything else, they could send them into a carpet company to have carpet made, and that's what the ladies did. They saved coupons to buy silver. They just did everything under the sun. But finally, on October the 3rd, in 1930, this was officially opened as a women's club. And we had a big bang-up party here last October the 3rd to celebrate the 50th year. And do you know what? Every lady used to have a new hat to wear to a party at the women's club. So we asked ladies to wear hats. And they brought out the most elegant hats. Some of them were 20, 30, 40 years old, and they wore hats for the party. And you know, we had that piano covered with gifts that the merchants had given us. We had more than 55 gifts that the merchants had given us to give as prizes at that party. And we had corsages for all the past presidents. And we had a great time because this building has been very important to people in Wabash. We've had art exhibits here. We've had musical programs here. We've just had everything here. And anybody in Wabash, it used to be any woman in Wabash or Wabash County could belong. But you know, women have plotted so to get in men's organizations. So last fall, we thought it was only fair to open the organization to men. And we do have some men members. And one man in town said, you know, every organization has a ladies' auxiliary, and I think it'd be fine if you had a man's auxiliary. Well, this room's no longer used as a ballroom, but we show films up here, and bless her heart, Mrs. Honeywell gave us those room darkening shades so it could be made darker up here so we could have films up here. And this room seats, the fire marshal will let us have, the fire chief will let us have, 85, 95 people up here because the chairs are movable. But you see, we make every effort to abide by every kind of law because we're interested in taking care of people. Does anybody have a question about this room? Yes.
Was this room built in the original building?
this room was part of the original structure. Now, I don't know whether there were other partitions. I know when the Women's Club was founded that they did a lot of replastering, and they changed a lot of doorways. And these 3 doorways, I know, were put in about 50 years ago. Now, this room may have been a big dormitory, probably where children slept all in one area. It could very well have been. And then the position of the windows, these are the original windows, and I don't know, there may have been other partitions through here. And I've never seen, I've looked, and you know I can't find the plan of the original building. I think it should be here someplace. But of course, this floor was laid about 50 years ago when people could afford to put fine maple on floors. But I imagine that this probably was divided. Now, the room downstairs, there are 2 rooms downstairs that have the original tin ceilings. So I don't think those rooms were, maybe partitions might have gone up part way, you know, to separate the hospital beds. But downstairs, those rooms must have been that size originally because of the tin ceilings. And that's a very good question, and you've asked the same question I've asked a long time, but I can't find the answer for either one of us. That's a good question. Anybody else have a question? Yes, dear.
When you were talking about the hospital, do you mean like this section in here was built in and the hospital came?
There's an L that extends out. When we go downstairs, we'll go into another area. We'll look at it from the outside window over here. But an extension was built to make the building bigger. Now, apparently that nobody seems to know. Isn't it too bad that records like that aren't kept? To say when this was done and when I've gone through a great many things, and I can't find it. But I still may find it. You know, I've been working on the windows of Presbyterian Church. We're doing a book. And I have sent pictures. You know, sometimes when you do historical research, you just have to work like 60. And you know, I've been wanting to find out the source of those windows. I went to the Art Institute in Indianapolis. A friend of mine went to the Theological Art Institute in Indianapolis. I sent the pictures to New York. I went to New York. I worked in a library in New York, and I went to a great church in New York and ran down to it. Then I sent the pictures to Philadelphia to the Historical Society. They didn't know when they came back, and they recommended that I send them to Princeton University. So I sent them to Princeton University, and got the answer. So sometimes when you do historical research about something, you have to go every place, and maybe someplace you find those answers. But I'm sorry, I can't tell you. But I'm looking. Anybody else have a question? Yes. No, this probably was, I imagine that this may have been sleeping quarters, a dormitory. You know, sometimes great big rooms were established in orphanages, and where we have wards, for example, in hospital now, where any number of beds may be housed. I think probably this was a sleeping area, and probably there were many, many beds in here.
Have you ever watched The Little Rascals? When they talk about there's an orphanage scene and all the boys are sleeping in one room, they sleep in a large room like this.
And I think that, I have an idea that's what this was originally. And of course, that word dormitory comes from the Latin word meaning to sleep. And you French students probably sing dormez-vous, nothing, are you still asleep? So it means the other place to sleep. Any other questions? Well, I tell you, over across the hall is another lounge, like the one downstairs. And sometimes we have so many, yes?
So like these things stick out that they've been divided?
They might very well. I have an idea where there are bigger wall spaces. Don't you suppose there could have been partitions there?
There's a window right there with the bells go out and you can get that out.
And of course there could have been another hall in here too. And I have an idea that other space down there may have been a smaller room. I just tried to figure it out. I can't. Maybe I'll find out how this is laid out. But those are the places where the original windows were. Yeah.
When you were talking
Well, I have an idea those records were kept. Sometimes people are very careless, aren't they? Sometimes people are careless and they think, oh, nobody will ever be interested in that, and they throw them away. But these records may be lurking someplace. But that's what happens. You know, at home when you clean house in spring and fall, you ever throw away things you wish you hadn't? Well, I think a great many local history societies feel that way. They think maybe too much house cleaning was done. Now, there's another room, the big room across the hall. I don't have any idea what that was used for originally. But that's a lounge where people may have parties. And in there, I want you to notice that, and there's some more paintings. There's from that Doherty family. There are two of them. There's one, a stagecoach painting, and I have an idea that it's probably not so old as it looks to be. It may be, I don't know. But there is a very old seascape that came from that same family. And over in that room, there's some hard rock maple furniture. And I have no idea what it would cost today, but it's good solid wood and it's been in there about 40-some years. And I came across an old record the other day, and it cost $325 to buy all that furniture. And the Woman's Club didn't have that much money, and do you know what some woman did? She advanced $325 to the club so they wouldn't have to pay interest. And I have an idea, because I know that woman, I knew that woman, I have an idea that she forgot to collect that $325 too. But, you know, the Women's Club has always made the effort to be fair. And that furniture in there was purchased from 3 different furniture stores in Wabash because they didn't want to show any partiality. They wanted to buy, but they got matching furniture from 3 different places. So the women have always made an effort to look after things. All right, is there another question about this part of it? I think it's nice to have a ball up here, but I don't suppose that the way structures are now and the way dances are now, anybody could ever do it. We'd probably knock it down.
Mr. Jones, back in the 1910s, in that era, kids used to be sent to schools to learn how to dance and how to socialize with one another. Was there ever an area used for that in this building?
Yes, there was. Now, not 1910, because you get with the hospital, but later on, there was a ballroom dancing teacher, a fine teacher, whose name was Mrs. Warrington. And Mrs. Warrington lived in the house, you know, where the house was torn down, looked across the street from the post office.
A little tiny one?
No,
Or
the big
Black
one.
was in?
The big one that was across the street. The one
The
where,
black one.
no, on the north.
Oh, yes, okay.
That big house. Now, she lived in the next house. That house has been since made into a double house. But she had a ballroom. She taught ballroom dancing there. And there still is a club in Wabash called the Terpsichorean Club. And Terpsichore was the goddess of dancing in Greek mythology. And that Terpsichorean Club started in Mrs. Warrington's ballroom dancing. And I did come across, I think maybe they had some exhibition dancing down here. But a long time ago, in the ballroom at the Eagles Theater, there were dances, and I think that there were classes, ballroom classes there. And then at a later period, there was another ballroom dancing. But so far as I know, only Miss Warrington has dancing. But there was at school ballroom dancing, very popular. People learned to do the one step and the foxtrot and things you never think of on the walls.
When the nurses, when we had to open up for the nurses, before the school came, the nurses just learned from the doctor, because the doctor was there.
And there were schools of nursing in big cities, and Miss Thomas was a registered nurse, And in the first class, there was a very fine nurse, Miss Fisher, who came in, and Ollie, but they nursed at the Wabash County Hospital for a long time. And one of them was the superintendent of the hospital. But you see, they learned, now that's called empiric learning. And before there were professional schools, the ladies who had been graduated from big cities would come to small places, and it would be they would be probationers, and it would be almost like being a nurse's aide, and that's how they. And I think probably today we'd call them practical nurses, because you know now you can there's a license for practical nurses, but there wasn't only supervision for nursing. But it was a big event when those 3 young ladies graduated. Anyone else have a question? Well, let's go over and look at There's another painting by Mrs. James. She was an artist, and she was graduated from the University of Nebraska. And she was a fine artist, and I think you'll see any number of her paintings in Wabash. Say, that's our enthusiastic furnace. Now this room's used for parties and meetings. You know, from September until January, in this clubhouse, there were more than 90 different club meetings, and more than 1,000 meals or food was served to more than 1,000 people in that length of time. And we have our own club manager, and we have a regular luncheon the first Tuesday or second Tuesday of every month. And the Women's Club is administered by a board. There's 35 people who work down here. And I want to tell you something about this community. I called 46 people. I'm the president of the Women's Club. And I called 46 ladies in Wabash to work. And do you know how many of them said they would? 45. And I wouldn't have called the 46th one if I'd known she had taken a position and she was working all the time. Now, I think that says mighty fine things about the community. But we had a town hall series last fall. We had 5 programs, and 10 ladies took part in that. And the board of directors runs the Women's Club. And in the early days, it was a big, big task then. I came across the minutes not long ago, and Mrs. Isaac Beitman, the first president of the Women's Club, she was the most public-spirited woman, and she was the force behind this club. She was negotiating to buy coal for the carload so they could save money. Does anybody have a question about this room? That's kind of noisy. Now the city looks after the exterior of the building and the boiler, and we'll call it their attention to this. It has been, they have known about this noisy valve. Yes?
Is that the original heating thing?
Well, I don't know how old this heating system is, but I do know that it would be impossible to install it today. Somebody told me one time that those radiators, you know, in older houses in Wabash, there's a lot of fine heating systems, and they say that this kind of heat is so expensive that it can be used only in public buildings. There are some older houses who have this kind of hot water and steam heat. And you see, when those radiators get hot, then I don't think this was the original, well, I know it wasn't the original heat, but it probably is, 80 years old, maybe from the hospital, but they might have put it in then. Anyone else have a question? Now, you notice how lucky we are. We have a piano in the ballroom, we have a piano here, we have a piano downstairs. I never have heard all 3 of them at the same time, but then if people wanted to have programs, they could. All right, go downstairs and we'll go through this. Oh, there's that stagecoach painting. I like that. And here's another painting by Mrs. James that was given in memory of her. Somebody else owned it. I do want to call your attention again to these handsome books out here on the bulletin board. Aren't they nice? Thank you. We can go down this way. Well, we can take a shortcut through here, too.
There's another Steve.
Yes, sir. We turned the heat up so it would be warm. And this is Mrs. Connell, who's on our board of directors.
Hello, I get to take over your tour from here. This piece is a hall mirror, except in old-fashioned homes where people left their gift cards. There was usually a basket on one. It's a gift of Mrs. McHenry, and it was given to the Women's Club in 1943, and it belonged to her parents. It's well over 100 years old. This buffet belongs to Mrs. Anna James, who helped found the clubhouse. This buffet came from Mrs. Fred Walter, who's husband Santa E. Walter. The round table, the table here, belonged to Jean Stratton Porter. Oh, I'm sure it is right here. This table belonged to Jean Stratton Porter. She had it designed for her home, and it will stretch out to seat 24 people, and if necessary, 26 by putting 2 on the 2 ends. The leaves are all over there. I don't know whether you ever knew Jean Stratton Porter was a writer who wrote for young people. She wrote Freckles and Girls Limberlost and many other things. But she lived in Wabash County. The paintings on the paintings on the wall were done by Mrs. Westner, who was Mrs. Tom Young's mother, and was given to the clubhouse. The round table back there belonged to Mrs. Isaac Beitman, one of the founders of the Women's Club. And the silver tray belongs to Mr. McCartney, who was auditor of the state, was given to him by his co-workers, and then was given to the Women's Club when he died. It was passed on by his sisters, who were members of the Women's Club. Any questions about this one?
I told you about this ceiling. This is one of the original ceilings, and this is embossed tin.
Have you ever gone to any of the stores downtown and walked in where PK's used to be? They used to have a ceiling like this. You still see them downtown. Pennies, right.
I didn't know I had a now that building is much later than I would have thought. But maybe just the front on that building is new. Because you know how this opera house used to get started. Yeah, an opera house is all those. I mean, I don't have ballrooms in places, but we have an opera house.
In fact, the next time you go by Penny's, you'll see a door that's closed and kept locked, and they use it for storage now, but if you were able to go upstairs, you could actually still see where the stage was and some of the pictures around the wall that they used to decorate the opera house with. They're still there.
Does anybody have a question about this room?
Now, this is one of the extensions, isn't it? When
Yes.
they built the hospital, this is the extension wing that we're talking about.
Now, I'm not sure about that porch. I do know there was a porch across the back that in the days when there was an orphanage. And you know that design on that balustrade out there, if you're over on Maple Street, you can get a wonderful view of this building. And we have a painting in one of the other rooms that shows the back of the building. And you know, making banisters was such a great craft. And I can take you to places in Wabash to show you the same kind of banister that's out on this side. There were such fine craftsmen, and occasionally they would repeat the pattern of a balustrade. And of course, you know, there's you can go up and down the streets. And it wasn't necessary for a craftsman to put his name on them, but he did such beautiful work that it's still there, and it was highly individual. There's a house on Main Street that has a balustrade like this. There's one up on Allen Street. And I don't know who made it, but I know the same man probably made it, or somebody who worked with him. Or maybe some lady said, Mrs. So-and-so has a pretty banister on her house, and I want one just like that. I think we have another room here. Yes.
More things like on the top of the doors, there's a couple of them on the top of those doors.
Those transoms.
Yeah, were those for vending or?
That's right. You know what? That's a good question. In the days when there was no air conditioning, practically every house had those windows at the tops of doors. Now, you know, it hadn't occurred to me that some of you people may never have seen those, but have you seen those transoms before?
Yeah.
And of course, people kept those open. You could close the door, but the air could circulate through those. And those are called transoms. Now, this room has another one of those embossed ceilings, too. And in this room, this is a very old piece of furniture. It came from the Norris family. And there's some more of those lovely paintings that came from the Doherty family. And those two paintings up there were purchased as memorials for people who worked at the Woman's Club. Mr. and Mrs. Lines and their daughter, Mrs. Bruce, were here for about 40 years to look after this club. And so these were purchased just last year as a memorial to Mr. and Mrs. Lines. And that one over there is a memorial to Mrs. Bruce. And those were done by local artists. And over here is a painting that shows the back of the Woman's Club with that balcony we were talking about.
Oh, it's like an old hotel or something.
It does, doesn't it? But think how nice it must have been to sit out on that porch.
Yeah.
I think it'd be real nice to sit out there. Does anybody have a question about anything in this room? We have a lot of parties in here, and we can seat about 60 people in here. And then we have a great big party. We set up the other one, too. Do you have any questions? Well, ladies, are you ready for them to sit down?
I think so.
All right, all you have a seat in here. I told you about the board. These ladies are members of the board. They love this place.
I understand the operating rooms are downstairs. Is that true or?
I'm not sure just where they were, but that's what I've been told. And I can remember when Nelson was down there, but I had such a vague recollection of it. I remember when we were on it.